A pleasant day to you icons and lady icons. Welcome to the third module of our discussion in the specialized subject General Biology 1, which is entitled The Basic Unit of Life. If you can still recall the different discussions that we had during Module 1 and Module 2, we're actually going to apply those concepts in this particular discussion. In this video discussions, we are actually going to unravel the different reasons why cells are considered as the basic unit of life, what are the different characteristics that is present on different cells, how are we going to apply the concept of the cell theory in our discussion, and lastly, what is the significance of the presence of the different biomolecules or the building blocks of life that we already discussed during the second module of our discussion for this subject. Now, in the case of Module 3, which is all about the basic unit of life, we are going to discuss here the concept known as cytology. Cytology, it is a branch of biology which deals about the concepts and the discussions that involves cells. Everything that is happening within the cell, cells' intricate mechanism, and the reasons why cells are considered as the basic unit of life. And in this discussion, we are going to start with the different features that is present among all cells. The plasma membrane, the semi-fluid substance called cytosol, and the concept of the cytoplasm, ribosomes that are responsible for the formation of protein polymers, and lastly, the genetic information. If you can still recall in our discussion during Module 1, which is all about the characteristics of life, the presence of a regime is actually present here at the part of the presence of the plasma membrane among the different types of cells. Also, the presence of the semi-fluid substance called cytosol, it is the part in which the different intricate mechanisms, just like the control process, and also the metabolic and the response process are located. Then ribosomes that are responsible for protein polymers and the genetic information, which is under the concept of generative process and at the same time the control process present among cells. Let's start with the first feature that is present among all cells, and that is the presence of the plasma membrane. The plasma membrane, it is known as a selective barrier that allows sufficient passage of oxygen, nutrients, and waste to service the volume of every cell. We will be having a separate discussion regarding the mechanisms that is involved in the entrance and exit of different materials in the plasma membrane on module number 5, because on module number 5 we are going to discuss here the cellular transport mechanisms. Why plasma membrane is very important not only in the integrity of the different cells, but also the reason why plasma membrane is very vital for the exchange of the different materials on the interior and the exterior of the cell. And whenever we are talking about the plasma membrane, just a short introduction regarding the different things that is present here, we're actually considering here that the plasma membrane is possessing a fluid mosaic model. Whenever we're talking about the fluid mosaic model, you can observe here that the plasma membrane is not made out of a single type of polymers or of biomolecules. But actually, the different things that is present in the plasma membrane are not only phospholipids, but also some proteins. Then, as you observed earlier, there's the presence of cholesterol as well, and the presence of carbohydrate side chains. So it means that from the term itself, fluid mosaic model, there's the phospholipids, which is responsible for the movement of the different materials in the interior and the exterior of the cell. Also, the reason why it is known as mosaic because of the presence of other materials, not only phospholipids, but also the presence, once again, of other biomolecules, namely carbohydrates and even different types of proteins. Other than the presence of the plasma membrane, in the interior of the cell, there is now the presence of the cytosol and the cytoplasm. All cells are actually possessing cytosol and cytoplasm. This is considered as a semi-fluid material that fills the interior of the cell. Or technically, this is the material in which the different organelles and the different parts, either membranous or non-membranous organelles present among cells, are suspended. At the same time, the gel-like structure is responsible for creating more integrity when it comes to the cell, and it is made out of gel-like substances which is particularly made out of different biomolecules and even water. Even though we are considered as made out of organic compounds, always remember that our body still needs inorganic compounds just like water for us to sustain life and for us to proliferate life here on Earth. If we're going to observe the cytosol and the cytoplasm, we're actually going to observe here that it is present in between the plasma membrane, and the nucleus. For instance, this is an example that is present among eukaryotic organisms. This is an example of a eukaryotic cell, and you can observe here, this is the presence of the nucleus. Then, these are the different organelles, namely the presence of the endoplasmic reticulum, both rough and smooth endoplasmic reticulum, the presence of some vacuoles, and even the Golgi apparatus. And you can observe here the presence of the plasma membrane at the exterior. If we're going to remove the different organelles here, the empty space that is present here in between the nucleus and the plasma membrane, it is known now as the cytosol. The cytosol, it is the material that is the reason why the nucleus can be suspended at the middle of the cell. Then, if we're going to include once again the presence of the different organelles, the organelles and the cytosol will now create what we call as the cytoplasm. Ribosomes are the non-membranous cell organelles that is present both on eukaryotic and prokaryotic organisms. These ribosomes are responsible for the formation of the different proteins that is necessary for different functions. Proteins carry out different functions when it comes to the cell. Other than the presence of the different enzymes, they are also responsible for the transport of different materials, and at the same time, they are responsible as well for the conduction of the different information that is present on our specific cells. In the case of the ribosome, the process of protein synthesis actually happens in two major locations. It is either in the cytosol, both for the eukaryotic and prokaryotic organisms, or it can also happen on the outside of the endoplasmic reticulum or the nuclear envelope. Ribosomes is actually possessing two main parts. We have the large subunit and the small subunit. The large subunit and the small subunit, they act just like a clamp. If you can still recall your discussion during the central dogma of molecular genetics, ribosome is actually the organelle that is very much responsible for the formation of the polypeptide chains after the process of translation. Other than the presence of the ribosome, every cell actually contains the deoxyribonucleic acid or the DNA, which is the hereditary molecule, and the ribonucleic acid, which is the molecule involved in protein synthesis. The DNA is responsible for storing the different information that is necessary for us to be humans, for other organisms to be just like what they are nowadays. DNA, if you can still recall in our discussion on module number 1, it is responsible for the control processes that is present in our body. The reason why we are possessing different types of features are actually because of the DNA. And in the case of the RNA, they are responsible now for helping and guiding the process known as the central dogma of molecular genetics for it to happen. Speaking of which, both prokaryotic and eukaryotic organisms are containing DNA. And this strand of DNA will be replicated first. After the process of replication, the DNA template strand will undergo the process known as transcription with the aid of the different types of mRNA and proteins to create now a messenger RNA, which will now be responsible for encoding the different materials and the different codes that is present on the DNA template strand. And lastly, the process known as translation, which will involve the presence of the single-stranded mRNA with the presence of the ribosome. They will now create here the different types of polypeptide chains based on the collection of the different proteins present now and encoded on the codons that is present on the mRNA. Once again, if we are going to consider the presence of the different characteristics that is present among all cells, always remember the presence of the plasma membrane, then the presence of the cytosol and the cytoplasm, then the third one, the presence of ribosomes, and lastly, the presence of genetic materials.